Welcome to the fourth edition of the ReadID webinar on remote identity verification. With COVID speeding into a second wave in many places, except for New Zealand, we think it's great to be able to reach out to you in this way. My name is Will Jansen and I'm Chief Marketing Officer of ReadID. Theme of this edition is conversion. But before we move to that theme, I would like to thank all of you that filled out the questionnaire that we sent out a few weeks ago. We were very pleased with the answers we got. We got many valuable suggestions for new topics and also really positive feedback on the format. So we'll continue with that. And one of the suggestions that was mentioned several times was to talk about the work we do for the UK Home Office, and that is one of the topics of today. So focus of today is conversion. In the second part, Maarten Wegdam will explain how ReadID helps in creating a really high conversion. During discussion, feel free to ask questions. Our online moderators, here also in the studio, will pick up your questions and pass them on to either Maarten, myself, or Steve, or we'll answer them directly. In the chat, there's also people from WorldReach, our co-host, our presenter from today, that can answer questions from their side as well. But we start with the great use case on conversion, the UK Home Office EU settlement scheme. We dive into this application with Steve Grant, Director of Business Development at the Canadian company WorldReach. And WorldReach is, together with ReadID and iProov, responsible for the EU Settlement Scheme app. And he's joining us from Canada. Over the past 20 years, Steve has worked as an expert with multiple organizations and governments. He has extensive experience in identity document systems, in border security, consular management software, and many other things. He's a member of several standardization organizations, such as the ICAO ICBWG working group and the ISO working group 3 standards group for travel documents. Welcome, Steve. How are you doing in Canada?
Goeiedag, Will. Thank you very much for the invitation. I very much appreciate the opportunity to join you and to support one of our very, very valuable partners, not only on our UK settlement scheme project, but on many others.
Good to have you here. Steve, to start off with, some of our viewers may not be familiar with WorldReach. Could you please tell a bit more about your company?
Sure. WorldReach has been around for a while. It's a privately owned company. The three founding partners are still involved in the company today. We exist since more than 20 years, almost well over 20 years in this space. We started providing IT services to the Canadian government, specifically a consular software product for our department, which is now known as Global Affairs Canada. It's roughly equivalent to the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, known as BUZA. So we provided the consular management system, which helps consular officers provide assistance to travelers in distress. Part of that system included the issuance of emergency travel documents, as well as full validity passports out of Canadian embassies and consulates and high commissions. That part of our business has grown over the years. We supply passport software to the British government as well, that's used in their embassies and consulates. And eventually we supplied a very interesting system to several British overseas territories. So places like Bermuda, Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos, they all use our passport software for issuing electronic passports. And what's interesting about that system is we provide it from a cloud-hosted server, which happens to sit in the UK. And that gave us a very interesting foundation for other projects such as the settlement scheme.
Okay, yeah. Great history at moving from passports into cloud services. To give our viewers an impression of how the settlement scheme works, you have a video that explains the flow. I suggest we have a look at that video, and it would be great, Steve, if you could explain a bit on what we see.
Absolutely. So what we have deployed for the UK government is what many see as a smartphone app is actually an entire service. So in addition to the app, which is available in Android and iOS, there is a very important back-end process. So the app we publish on behalf of the Home Office includes several initial pages of instructions and terms and conditions. We ask the applicant to select if they're using an ID card or a passport, and we guide them through the process of taking an image of their passport data page. So we read the information in the machine readable zone. We also capture contact details so that we can communicate the results or advise of a problem. So we use a one-time PIN combined with either a phone number or an email address, just so we know that we're able to communicate with the applicant. The next step is the important one, and this is really where the ReadID magic takes place. We are reading the information off of the ePassport chip using the NFC capability of the smartphone. The next step is the liveness. You mentioned our partner iProov, and this is a step to make sure that it's a real live person applying for this immigration permission, and then it's not a photo of a photo or a mask. So the liveness information is captured on the smartphone and analyzed in a back-end server process. We also capture a selfie. We have some quality control on this selfie to make sure that it's usable for facial recognition. So we make sure that the lighting is okay, that the eyes are open, that the pose is neutral. And we'll just pause on that last screen for a moment. So what we did just before the screen was we showed the applicant the information we read from the machine readable zone. And then it got transmitted to our client at the Home Office for them to do further processing. This is a representation of the data that gets transferred to the Home Office systems. So you can see we showed the machine readable zone and the e-chip, so we showed the data that was coming from both. We also showed the results of 3 different facial image matches that we're doing. We're matching the image retrieved from the chip with the selfie. We're also matching the same chip image against a screen grab from the liveness. And finally, we're matching the liveness image against the selfie. So we have a 3-way match. If you were looking very closely there, you also saw the results of the analysis of the data from the chip. And this is the important part that ReadID is involved in. So we don't just accept the data from the chip, we analyze it to make sure it's accurate, that the hash values are okay, that the certificates are valid. And if the passport is equipped with other forms of authentication, such as passive authentication, active authentication, we are able to perform those checks as well.
Yeah, so you do a very extensive matching between the person holding the passport and the owner of the passport in this case. Not only the liveness check, but also the matching in different ways.
That's correct. So we call our service IDV, Identity and Document Verification. So the output of this process indeed is, no, I don't want to say a score, but the result is that we know it's a real document, it's a valid document, that the person holding it and performing this application process matches the document, and that they are a real live person at the moment that they're going through this process.
Yeah, okay, great. As you explained, WorldReach is not a very large company, but still the UK Home Office project is quite prestigious. Can you explain how it, or tell us more about how you went about to win
it might be, It would be my pleasure to do that, and perhaps you could bring up the timeline slide in my presentation, and I can talk through that. It wasn't an overnight success, despite the fact that some people might wonder, where did WorldReach come from in this space? We've been working in this space for quite some time. In fact, in mid-2014 is when we first started looking at the idea of this, using a smartphone to verify electronic passports and EID cards. That initial work that we did led to a project with the Canadian government that was funded by the Canadian Safety and Security Program. We did this in partnership with two Canadian government entities, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada and Canada Border Services Agency. The project was called Faster Priv Bio, and the contribution from CSSP covered a portion of the costs of our activities. Not everything. That's one of the principles of the CSSP program, is that all of the stakeholders have to make their own contributions. What that program resulted in is us having an IDV platform that we could then start showing to other, to potential clients. We had some ideas about how IDV might be used. Our first idea, in fact, was for an e-visa or an electronic travel authorization. Some of the participants today might be familiar with ESTA in the United States, or ETIAS, which is coming up in Europe. And that's what we were looking at, that we thought this technology could be used for applicants for a program like that. So we, in fact, applied and were successful with the ICAO New Technologies Working Group request for information process, which they run every 2 to 3 years. And our proposal was selected for presentation at this event, which took place in the spring in 2017. The feedback we got from that event was very, very encouraging. Several government officials from passport agencies and immigration authorities in different parts of the world thought that we were onto something, and we were quite encouraged. Later that year, we participated in a public tender from the UK government, from the Home Office, to deliver an identity and document verification service. What was interesting about the tender is that we didn't know exactly what it was going to be used for. And partly that was because of all the secrecy surrounding Brexit and surrounding the UK government's preparations for Brexit. They were very reluctant to disclose that in the media because, as you know, it wasn't a done deal at that point. It was still a question mark. So we were successful through a competitive procurement. It was a 2-stage process. We were shortlisted, and we went forward with a formal proposal. And Martin, you probably remember very much that process and going through it. It was challenging, and we were thrilled to be successful in the end, and received a contract from the Home Office to develop this further, which eventually became the settlement scheme. And in 2018, the first transactions were processed as part of a beta trial. It eventually launched in March. I shouldn't say eventually, because there was a lot of hard work that went on in between the initial contract award and the go live, particularly around the user experience. We had a lot of excellent contributions from the Home Office. They have a team that is dedicated to working on customer experience on any systems that they deploy. We participated fully in that process. And on March 29th, we started processing live transactions, reaching 1 million later that August. And within the last 2 weeks, we've passed the 4 million transaction mark, something that we are certainly proud of, and we believe all of our partners are equally proud.
Yeah, definitely we are, Steve. Those are numbers that we we hardly expected to reach when we started this. About that beta testing program, that was really, really extensive, wasn't it?
Absolutely. The Home Office was extremely cautious because anything related to Brexit was very much under the microscope in the UK. So they couldn't. They wanted to make sure that anything they deployed publicly was going to work. The initial testing started in very controlled groups. Home Office even provided the devices for people to use, and they would essentially coach them through the process. So they looked at how the process could be used by experienced smartphone users, by new smartphone users, younger people, older people, people who might have visual impairments and are able to use smartphones with aids that enlarge the text or read out the text. There was an extensive amount of testing done. So following that phase where the Home Office provided devices, we moved into a second phase where we had teams going to hospitals and universities primarily, where there were large numbers of potential applicants available. There would be a briefing session done, and then people were asked to download the app and install it. And we learned a lot about taking people through the entire process where there were potentially some things that might be a little bit catchy, that might slow the process down, or perhaps trigger somebody to abandon the process. And I think all of that effort that went into the user experience has really paid off. Yeah,
it's learning how to create a great conversion. The numbers that you already mentioned a little bit in the EU settlement scheme are huge. You already mentioned that we now reached 4 million transactions. Can you share a few of them with us?
Certainly. We can have a look at the fourth slide in my deck, and I'll go through some of these numbers. So we've now passed the 4 million mark, which is great. At the beginning of the process, even there were a whole range of estimates as to how many people might be eligible for this program, and they range from 3 million to 4 million. Applications are still coming in at a fairly steady pace. We also, I think it was about a year ago, we had one of our peak days where we processed 30,000 applications in one day. And the system, the infrastructure that we've built is able to handle that and more. One of the really interesting statistics from my perspective is the next one. We've seen well over 2,500 different devices. Nobody anticipated that. In fact, our early discussions with the Home Office on which hardware devices we would support or we should support, we were talking about 30 or 40 or 50 different devices that had the largest market share in the UK market. Nobody anticipated this number of devices. The conversion rate, well above 85%, and it's important to note that this is the complete end-to-end process. So this covers a lot of different things which are taking place on the phone. Things that you saw in the short video we showed. Some people don't get past the machine readable zone read just because it might be a little bit finicky, or maybe maybe one of their children needed attention and they put their phone down. So there's lots of different reasons. We've had some people take multiple selfies. Maybe they're trying to get the perfect selfie, or maybe the lighting in the space that they're sitting in isn't good. So there's all kinds of different reasons, but to have this high rate with all of those factors considered is quite remarkable.
Yeah.
We've seen every European passport and many others, because while the primary applicant for this settlement scheme needs to be a European or EEA or Swiss national, they may have dependents who are not. And so we see passports literally from all over the world. We do track a lot of telemetry, so we know how long people take to get through the process. And for a process that a person may only perform once, perhaps 2 or 3 times if they're doing it for a family member, so it's not something you get practice at. For someone to do that process in on average 10 minutes or less is quite good. We have a good app rating in Google Play. It varies from time to time, but we've peaked at 4.1, and we believe that we have a very satisfied client in the UK Home Office.
Yeah, great numbers. To zoom in on one of them, the conversion, you say over 85%. Of course, the people using the app have an interest in getting through it, but what are the key elements of reaching such high conversion, according you think at least?
Well, the individual components that we use are all very reliable. We took great care to select our partners, whether it's for the selfie capture or the NFC or the machine readable zone. But also we had to stitch all of these components together in a very logical way, in a way that would encourage the applicant to go through the process. I think the NFC reading, which ReadID is responsible for, is a perfect example of how we've been able to take a supplier's service that is very good and make sure that it fits properly in the entire system, because it's not a simple process. In fact, this is the process that made people the most nervous about the settlement scheme. Will people be able to read the chip? There are a lot of variables. Where the chip is placed in the passport by the passport booklet manufacturer, the power required by the chip, the RF power, the radio frequency power to power up the chip and read, the capabilities of the smartphone antenna and where on the phone the antenna is placed. So all of these factors are important. And perhaps you can pull up slide 6 just for a moment. And this serves to emphasize some of the variability that we were facing in this process. I mentioned that there's differences in the passports out there. So this is a measure taken based on more than 1 million observations, and across the x-axis at the bottom is all the different types of documents that we've seen that we have, I think, have had over 100 reads. And on the y-axis is the average read time. So you can see there's huge variability in this. So if you build your process to have certain timeouts where it will stop processing based on a typical passport, you might disturb the user experience for a lot of people who happen to have a passport that's a little bit slower and doesn't read properly. So all of these things have to be very carefully orchestrated, and the contributions that ReadID made to our project had to take advantage of a lot of knowledge of how the chips and passports are working.
Yeah, yeah. Related to this, we have a question from Thomas. Question to you, Steve. With so many different devices, it must have really be hard to come up with a uniform feedback loop within the application. And how did you go about that?
It's always a debate about how much feedback you provide to the user. Not every user is an expert user. Not every user is going to know what NFC is, or even that their smartphone has an antenna. So what do we tell them? We tell them that it's failed and that they need to try again. But we also need to know that certain passports might go into a safe mode if there's been a misread. The hardware on the phones are different, and they might need a different amount of time to reset before they attempt a second read. So all of these things we have to deal with, and we have to format or formulate the messages to the user in such a way that they're getting just the right amount of information to guide them through the process, and not too much to make it confusing.
Yeah, to summarize, making something simple is very, very hard.
Well put.
Yeah. I think Maarten will also dive into a few of those details later on in his presentation. Given time, I would like to move on to the next part. And thank you very much, Steve. You'll be available for other questions later on in discussion if somebody has a next question.
Absolutely, dank je wel. It's been my pleasure.